Hello, my name is John Baston. I'll be the moderator for today's webinar on how states can navigate the modernization of technology systems. Over the last 8 years, a driving topic of Medicaid enterprise systems technology has been modularity. Software systems designed to be, as CMS recommends, partitioned into discrete, scalable, reusable components. AWS and Innovator believe this was and is an important step to breaking up monolithic system implementations that increase risks and costs. But they also believe the modularity shouldn't be thought of as a silver bullet. And as a result, there's some strategies states should leverage to hasten the shift towards becoming data-driven enterprises. The leaders on this panel will discuss how to think differently about modularity in terms of what it is, why it's important to keep payers and the providers at the center, and how states should ensure modularity is tied to Medicaid's overall transformative journey. Our conversation will include topics you see on your screen. Oops, we'll skip to that right now. Topics you see on your screen. But also we encourage our audience to ask questions throughout the webinar via the Q&A button. The chat itself will be disabled, but certainly leverage that Q&A button. If the panelists don't get a chance to answer your questions live, then we'll make sure we do a follow-up with a response via email. In addition, we'll have a couple of polling questions during the presentation, so please stay tuned for that as well. And as always, we encourage you to explore and learn more about both AWS and Innovator on our websites, and the Innovator's best-in-class data activation platform, which you can also find on the AWS marketplace. Excuse me. Links to both of those are in the show notes within this webinar. So without further delay, I am pleased to introduce today's panel. We're privileged to have Nick Ertakis, Medicaid Transformation Leader with AWS. Joining Nick is Dr. Nace, Chief Medical Officer at Innovator, and Brandon Grafe, Senior Director for the Government Segment, also at Innovator. So it's great to have you here today, gentlemen. Before we get started, I'd like each of you to briefly share a little bit about yourselves and your journeys in the healthcare space and with our listeners and our viewers. So let's start with you, Nick.
Hey, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Nick Ertakis. I'm a Medicaid Transformation Leader on the AWS HHS team. That is part of our public sector here at AWS. And what does that mean? That means that I work with our great partners and bring our AWS services to transform and improve the Medicaid experience. That's the Medicaid experience for beneficiaries, for members, for providers, for hospitals, anywhere that Medicaid touches folks. That's what I'm all about. I come from a federal background. I was with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the State Systems Division, for 10 years. I was deputy director and had oversight of all 56 state and territories that were building new Medicaid enterprise systems. They were certifying those systems. They were going live and everything in between. Started with high tech and the Affordable Care Act, all the way through 21st century cures on the federal side. But that was a wonderful opportunity to be at a high level and work with all the states and territories, but I didn't actually have as much time as I wanted to actually dive into specific challenges and really innovate with states. That's what I get to do on the AWS team, and that's what I get to do with our great partners here. That's what I really love. So happy to be here today, happy to talk about modularity and Medicaid enterprise systems and what transforming that space looks like. I'm also based in Denver, Colorado, and it's beautiful and sunny, and I might sneak out to the mountains this weekend if I can get away. So that's me.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Nick, appreciate that. Dr. Nace.
Yeah, David Nace. I'm a physician, trained in Pennsylvania, UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical. And it's funny, early in my career, I got really interested in the needs of Medicaid recipients in the community. I was working with Connie Delmuth at the time. This is way back at the Bureau of Children's Services, Medicaid, really addressing how do you implement EPSDT, really innovative services for children in the community. That was a while ago, and I recognized the challenge of working with different agencies, and we had no data at the time. So that was, an interesting challenge. Fast forward 35 years, I've worked with many different technology organizations, 10 years with McKesson Corporation, where we did large statewide managed care implementations as part of waiver processes, Mississippi, in Illinois, and again, started to build these data warehouses. Again, very slow builds, very complicated, and had always been enamored with, why do we have all these innovations coming out of California that seem to be so quick and easy to use, like the smartphone we have in our hands? So came out to look for a data company, been here at Innovacer for 7 years, and we're doing some really interesting things. Really looking forward to this discussion today.
Thank you, Dr. Nace. And Brandon.
Hey, pleasure to speak to everyone today. My name is Brandon Greifey, the Senior Director of Government here at Innovacer. And my job is to really help governments leverage our technology to transform their Medicaid experience. What that means to me is to make better use of their data assets to really drive improved outcomes. And throughout my career, I've helped several states implement enterprise data warehouses. And really, I've seen some incredible opportunities that's brought along the way, but also some pitfalls of the implementations. And I look forward to talking about that with the panel here today. And then I started my career working for the state of North Carolina. And my role was really to sit at the intersection of policy and technology to make sure that they are working sort of hand in hand to answer each other's goals, that the technology served our policy goals and that our policies helped us to drive towards better technology. And so really, I think ultimately what I'm hopeful and hoping to do is to help states make data-driven decisions, because I think that's what I've built a career around doing, and looking forward to talking about it again here today.
All right, great. Thank you, Brandon. All right, so before we jump into the topics that are at hand on how to modernize Medicaid technology and systems, let's level set a little bit first on some of the acronyms and the technology and the terms that we're going to hear. So, Nick, I'll go to you, given your background with CMS, right? Some of those terminologies come from CMS. So, can you help define Medicaid enterprise systems and modularity for the audience?
Yeah, sure. So I think what I'll just mention is that there's definitely a federal definition of Medicaid enterprise systems and modularity. And that centers around that an MES is composed, it's the sum total of the modules within it. And each module is a discrete IT system used to manage, monitor, and administer the state's Medicaid program. I worked to help write that, and it sounds very governmenty. There was a lot of lawyers that helped us construct that because it's part of sub-regulation. That's the way it goes. I also love cars. So for me, a Medicaid enterprise system can actually be a car. A car serves a real specific purpose. That purpose is transit, right? It gets a person from A to B, but A to B can be a whole bunch of different things. You might get your car initially to drive to your job, but then you also use your car to go to the grocery store, fill it with groceries. You can take it up to the mountains and go skiing in the winter. You also put your family in it and go off to soccer practice. So a car is actually a piece of machinery and technology. It's evolved over time, and it's used for a variety of transit purposes. And I think that a Medicaid enterprise is like a car in that way, except instead of transit, a Medicaid enterprise provides health coverage for those who need it. And there are many different facets of what a Medicaid enterprise system does. It might do pharmacy work, it might process claims, it might work with managed care organizations and do fraud, waste, and abuse and long-term service activities, all different activities, but really centered around administering health coverage for those who need it. So that's really what I anchor myself on. And then if the Medicaid enterprise is a car in that way, modularity is actually what allows you to swap out parts, put on studded snow tires in the winter because there's a need for that out here in Denver. But then if the alternator goes out, I can go to the parts store, I can find an alternator that's not actually the OEM, the one originally from the manufacturer, but it's the same size and specs, and I can swap that in. I can get myself back up on the road and running. And then I can even make upgrades, right? So if I realize I need a little bit more horsepower to get over, get through Eisenhower Tunnel and all the way up to the Continental Divide, I might need a horsepower upgrade. So I could upgrade the engine. I could even swap out the engine if I'm feeling ambitious, but that's going to be a larger undertaking. And so modularity for Medicaid, a Medicaid enterprise, I think is the same thing. It's the ability to upgrade, change, and enhance those discrete components of a Medicaid enterprise system to improve it in some way. So there you go. There's my quick analogy for you.
Great, thanks, Nick. Appreciate that. I might stick with you for the start of this next question, and then maybe go to the Brandon. But obviously, CMS believed modularity to be important, right? And I mean, the contract was introduced back in 2006 with the MITA framework. One of those acronyms, Medicaid Information Technology Architecture. And it made a requirement for enhanced federal matching as well in 2011. So given the incentives and requirements for states, what do you think CMS's vision overall? And did it live up to that vision? And what are some of the benefits and challenges that have defined states' experiences with modularity to date? So let's start with you, Nick, and then we'll go to Brandon maybe if you have something to add on.
Sure, happy to comment. So I think the vision and I think the noble goal of modularity still rings true. I think the North Star of what it can mean for Medicaid agencies, what it can mean for, what the analogy that I just used, swapping out parts, swapping out technology, taking best in breed, bringing in the innovation that exists with all of the technology partners out there, bringing them into the space. That sounds great, but I would also say that I don't think we're there yet. I think you've seen this evolution happen over time. There's been, additional guidance that has come out from CMS that helped or that tried to push it in certain directions and really give more structure and definition, like what is a module, and you have some more conventional structures. But I think that it's a thing that has evolved over time. And like I said, I'm not sure we're actually there yet. I think one thing that when I was on the federal side, didn't really understand the impact of the barrier to modularity. The impediment was the criticality of Medicaid systems. And that sounds kind of silly, right? Like, of course, Medicaid systems are critical, but if I go back to the car analogy, if you're using that car every day to get to your job, to get groceries, it's your core transport, and then you want to upgrade it, but it's going to take you 2 weeks to do an upgrade, or maybe 2 months if you're going to swap out an engine. Like that's going to dramatically hamper your willingness to innovate and like actually make that happen. And I think the criticality of the systems in some ways is a barrier to implementing that vision. That's why we see things like a lot of states that are building other systems in parallel while keeping their legacy system currently operating. That legacy system continues to do the heavy lifting of current day-to-day operations, and then that new system, the new one that they're building, has a lot of hopes and dreams pinned on top of it. So a couple of thoughts. Brandon, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, completely agree, right? The vision feels the same. The desire to break up these monolithic systems into implementation to reduce risk and promote reuse. All that's really important. And, to steal your metaphor, being able to swap out the alternator or soup up your engine is really important to get into where we need to go. On the other hand, and again, to your point, I think it's still evolving, right? Like how we define modules in the context of existing investments and the anticipation of future needs is just still underway, still being defined. But I think we're making progress now in a way that we weren't even just a few years ago. It felt like states were almost stuck. They were trying to perform like a game theory analysis, like a version of the prisoner's dilemma, where each of them saw the benefits of making this dramatic shift into this new world of modularity, but everyone was sort of waiting around to see someone go first, to define the parameters of a module first, to learn the rules of the game sort of the hard way. And I think that that's changing. And I think we're seeing states now be really more creative in the way that they're defining and standing up their modules based on the business problems that they're trying to solve. And I think the other big thing that sort of I've seen move us towards progress and evolve along the way is how difficult the procurement process is, right? modularity shifted one thing that states historically struggle with, addressing technical debt, to another thing that's an equal challenge, which is managing myriad vendors across implementations. And I think both of those in some ways serve to take away from the thing that states are really great at, right? Like serving as those laboratories of policy, creating policy innovations that really make people healthier. And so I think now we're just getting back to the point of solving challenges first and foremost, working to minimize the weaknesses of the procurement and the implementation along the way by really homing in on that business problem and then designing a modular strategy to address it.
And Brandon, I'll just plus one real quick. I think that we're definitely seeing progress there. I also think the environment helps really make that conducive. So, I mean, during the public health emergency, there was an incredible amount of innovation and ramped up work that was really fast, really effective, and impacted and had a really big impact. And like that environment shows that it can be done, and it like there's a way to really make that happen.
Yeah. So let's key in that for a second, Nick. It seems like one of the themes here is that, and the discussion is really that time to value. So how should states think differently about procurement or implementation in order to achieve, outcomes faster? Dr. Nace?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I made a reference to smartphones. I love Nick's example of a car, but I think about my smartphone because it's something that everybody uses. Now, when I started in industry, back when I was working with the Children's Cabinet, for instance, like the new innovation was a cell phone. It was about this big. I carried it around in my car, had this antenna that came out of it, and it was clunky. Now we have a smartphone and we know about time to value, right? We have a problem we need to solve. We bring a module in, right? We just download an app and it solves the problem. We have an immediate sense of an outcome because whether it's useful or not, maybe we swap that out and put another module in. We know that technology is moving very quickly. Now, when we talk about enterprise systems like an MES, that's a bigger install, it's a bigger lift. And that technology is moving along very quickly too. I think that's what we're here to talk about. In the old, go back 10, 15 years, we're talking about 7 years to really doing procurement, making a decision, and then building a system and putting it into place. 7 years. And by the time you were done, things changed. Like you were building something for the world that had been, and now the requirements are different, the expectations are different. And today we're now thinking about technology, about doing things in months or 1 to 2 years very quickly, and having outcomes also be present very quickly to say, did we make the right decision? And then also, are we meeting the requirements of today, not yesterday? So these are the kinds of things that technology is allowing. And I think, Nick, you hit it right on the head. The pandemic had us all realize, right, that we could implement these innovations where before we weren't so clear that we were. Telehealth's a great example, right? How many of us are having our primary care visits and physical therapy now at home, where we knew we could do that before, and we learned we could do it by testing and implementing and doing rapid innovation. And I think building for the future, being able to adapt to the change and having that flexibility and giving the sense of the outcomes, not just focusing on technology for the sake of technology, is where we are today.
Great. Thanks,
Dr. Nace. I love that. I actually just I was thinking as you were talking, I was like, what if when I was going about my day and I wanted to say, like, you know what, I want to download an app that would help me run, right? It would track my running and, like, I don't know, integrate with my watch and do all these things. And I don't know exactly what's out there, but okay, I've heard of something. I'm going to click download. And then it was like 2 years before I got that app loaded onto my phone. I might not even live in Denver in 2 years, and who knows what the weather is going to be like. So right. there's a strong argument to be made for that time to value and like what we have come to expect in the year 2023 for functionality. And I think you're exactly right when you think about, like, the systems that are built today, a Medicaid system, a lot of times it has that long runway and long landing strip for implementation. And then when it arrives, it solves the need from when it was started. It solves the need from like 3 or 4 or 7 years ago. And okay, that's great, but a lot of things have quite likely changed there. And suddenly now you're already talking about modernizing, upgrading, making changes back to that.
Yeah.
And I loved
Well, sounds like-
your analogy of building in parallel. I'm actually sitting here looking at the Oakland Bridge. And when we built this bridge, we actually built it next to the old bridge because you can't just shut things down, right? Cars keep having to commute, people have jobs. And, you know, you talk about Medicaid and enterprise system, you know, you're paying claims, you're checking eligibility, you're providing service every day. Today's technology, you can start to implement and test something out and then make it live when you're comfortable and you know the integrity's there and it's giving you the value that you're going to receive once you go live.
Great. All right, let's take a pause here and do our first polling question. And what we're going to ask is, how would you categorize the current status of your journey towards modularization? And we'll give a couple of minutes for everybody to answer that question. You can go mature, nascent, planning, not begun yet. Obviously, this is more geared towards the states. We have a number of different participants on here, but yeah, feel free to answer. While we're doing that, let's give everybody a couple of minutes, and then we'll go over the results. But while we're doing that, let's just talk a little bit about the journey itself. Many states are in different various stages of their MES modernization. Some are pretty far along. For those that may have some procurements under their belt, what kind of recommendations would the panel make to this audience for their future modular journey? And then we'll do a conversely of that for those who are just getting kicked off in their journey. So Nick, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a couple of things. I think there are just some fabulous partners here we are talking today that are innovating and working in this space. And I think talking to them about like what is emerging, what can impact, like what can transform, what can actually be done in this space goes a long way. At AWS, like we love having those sorts of think big conversations and can spend time mapping out what that can look like. This is part of the process about how AWS actually innovates and what Amazon does to build and roll out new features and functionality. That's the same thing that we work with, that we bring to state Medicaid agencies and customers out there. What I would say for Medicaid agencies that are, maybe fairly far along in their modernization journey and looking to optimize and grow in this space is actually a start small and deliver. Like if I can distill it down to a bumper sticker, it's like you probably have a lot of things in flight and a lot of things moving. What we do at AWS and at Amazon is understand the customer need and then work backwards from that. And so we really center on stripping away everything else that is extraneous and then just delivering something that is really delightful to that specific customer. And an example of that, we worked with, during the pandemic, we worked with the New York State Department of Health and worked there with a partner, created the first COVID-19 registry with them. The Department of Health was trying to manage disparate data sources amidst the evolving pandemic, and they were looking for new solutions and an alternative way of doing things, including cloud solutions. We worked with them and a partner, and we quickly stood up a database to capture real-time clinical data, included symptoms, length of stay, hospital and comorbidities, underlying health conditions. And this effort, start to finish, was 11 days. That includes training time for the State Department of Health folks on how to use it. So that meant that rollout could be immediately used, spun up, immediately used, and they were seeing results from that. And they're now able to grow it in other ways, and then continue that pace of innovation. But that all comes from a real focused understanding of what does the customer need? What does that focus look like? Work backwards from there, strip away everything else that's extraneous, and then just deliver something that is really delightful, that is really powerful, taking advantage of the services and innovation that's out in that space, and make that happen. So yeah, those are my thoughts there. Maybe Brandon, what do you think?
I just want to reiterate what you said, right? Like start small and deliver. If I would title this webinar or anything, it would be start small and deliver, because I don't think it can be said enough. I think that there is a feeling that once we've defined all of the problems that we as a Medicaid agency need to solve, that we want to procure a solution that kind of ticks off all of them, as opposed to kind of identifying sort of some subsets of problems, discrete challenges that we can address very quickly, grow momentum, and then build functionality along the way to be able to address sort of everything that we're trying to achieve. What I would encourage is that as modules mature, also that states avoid the mistakes that ultimately led to the monoliths in the first place. And what I've tended to notice, especially in the EDW world, is that they just tend to grow in scope until states start with the same problem or end up with the same problem that they started with. Like these systems become enormous and unwieldy. They become just sort of risky to rip and replace. They're not necessarily nimble, and you can't take advantage of all of the technology innovations and advancements that have happened since you've begun to implement them. And so to really be able to start small and deliver, I kind of want to back up a step and de-emphasize the solution and really emphasize that flexible data layer up front. Like, how can we build things like purpose-driven data lakes or data stores so that you can rapidly try out the new technologies or software? To go back, Nick, to the answer you gave to the last question, right? Like, how frustrating would it be to download an app to solve a need today, only to see that that download time is going to take 2 years? Like it just can't be that way, right? We get frustrated along the way, our needs change, and it just doesn't answer the challenge that we need it to. And so I think this is a lesson that we've learned in startups as well. Like here at Innovacer, we fail fast. It saves time, it saves resources, allows us to really quickly tie this cause and effect, and we ultimately are getting towards our goal faster. But having come from government, it's the exact opposite, where you're profoundly afraid of failure. And so my recommendation is don't be. Learn from the startups. Don't get caught in this sort of sunk cost fallacy, because you miss innovative ideas along the way. And so really build data foundations that allow you to do that, to fail fast and to innovate.
Great, thanks, Brandon. So let's go to the poll results here. Let's bring those up and see what we've got. All right, so how we categorize your current status for the journey. Nobody's in mature, kind of expected that. We've got one that's in a nascent opportunity. Several are still in planning, and then and some have not yet begun yet. So good timing for us to have these conversations about what you should and shouldn't be doing as you're going along in this process. So we might have answered some of these questions, this next question already, but the first question we just talked about was people that are further along. And guys, we need to move forward. We certainly can. But the next question was really about those that are in the beginning parts of their journey. Anything to add for that? Which is several of the people on our call and answered our questions. Any advice for them beyond what you already gave?
So I will say the same thing, actually. Start small and deliver. I think it's interesting that you can have the same response for whether you're mature or starting out. But I would say that one of the biggest challenges that we see with customers, even just moving to the cloud or thinking about what transformation looks like for Medicaid systems, is that sometimes there can be a little bit of a paralysis if you can't figure out how to how do we move every module, or what is that entire roadmap for all 13 or 14 conventional business areas of a Medicaid enterprise system. How do you actually tackle that? That's too big, frankly, to take on. I saw a lot of those projects, and they're 10-year, they're huge. And I think that one of the things we do at AWS, and I know our Innovator does and our partners do, is help train and get folks comfortable in this innovative space, in the transformative technology space. what actually is possible out there, both through the technology and the services, and in application, and then with a little bit of comfortability about what the services and technology looks like, then breaking apart and finding, well, what's like the stickiest challenge that you're facing, or the most painful thing that you have. Let's put that on a whiteboard. Let's work backwards from that and figure out, okay, if this is the stickiest and most challenging thing that you have, who is at the center of that? Who's the customer, or who's the member, who's the person that is impacted by that? Work backwards from there, and suddenly the pieces fall into place. You can think big and you can innovate, and you can figure out like, okay, let's solve for this sticky situation which impacts this. Maybe it's a member group, a group of, an eligibility group specific. If you solve for that and you build that and then you deliver on that, then great, you can move on to the next challenge. So that's what I would say there.
Yeah, there is a
Right.
lot of planning going on, and I would emphasize, Nick, you can get stuck in planning stage because you're always waiting for the next cycle of innovation, right? And I think part of it is we've learned, and this is where the partnership with AWS and Innovacer has come in, is you can move stuff into the cloud today. It's very secure. And then not have to worry about hiring all that security folks. And then, with Innovator, bring a data model and start aggregating the data, making it trustable, managing the quality of the data, and then start to get insights to really solve the problems, verify the problem that you're trying to solve, and then find a way to build that module very quickly to be able to address the issue and see the performance.
Great. So let's switch gears a little bit from procurement to some of that technology like AWS or Innovator, but it feels like there's been a recent explosion of technology around innovations, particularly around artificial intelligence and machine learning. And those things can really have a dramatic effects and positive effects on the Medicaid and the Medicaid program and processes. ChatGPT is an example. I just got an email yesterday from, I forgot what it's called, Bard, the Google one, asking me to, because I have a Google phone, can I participate in that? But, what should states be doing to get ready to take advantage of some of those applications and those innovations? Let's start with you, Dr. Nace.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. We were talking about smartphones a minute ago, and now we're all taking a look at ChatGPT and some of the other organizations that are bringing this out. The world has changed. The world has changed from having large enterprise data systems that you can query and just ask questions of over a period of time and say, okay, this is going on, to actually getting insights, actionable insights that you can put into the workflow of the people that do things, put into the workflow of the network, understanding how your network's working or not. Look at the outcomes by doing outcome surveys with the members, people that are receiving Medicaid services. And so the idea of moving cloud, getting very nimble, getting very flexible, these are things that we can start to do today, and then start to be able to have ease of query where you can ask in actually very simple ways using voice or text to ask a simple question, just like we read about ChatGPT, and say, what is my current performance of the network in this county, right? What are the current gaps in care for patients that have diabetes in the Medicaid program statewide, and get an answer very quickly. So it's very interesting how quickly the world has changed to be able to do these natural queries.
I mean, I'll just add on to that. I think that one of the things that has me most excited is like at AWS, our comprehensive set of AI and machine learning services. We've got a world of like all skill levels that can support. Something that I myself, I'm not a technologist, Medicaid policy, federal background, but I'm really excited about is how this can actually be applied. So I talk to our solutions architects, and then I dream and be like, okay, what if we could actually just like ask a question of the data instead of writing a bunch of queries and trying to like set something up? What if you could do that? And then fortunately, like, oh, that's what our like the brilliant solutions architects and coders and developers are actually building. We had something that just came out. It's called QuickSight Q. QuickSight is our data-driven, or it helps data. It's a business intelligence at hyperscale service, and allows for dashboarding, reporting, scale generation of all that information of your data. And QuickSight Q, just announced, actually allows anyone to just ask questions in natural language and receive accurate responses, including relevant visualizations of the data. So like with this announced and what this means for the future is, I can, as a government background, like policy focused person, I can ask questions like, you know, which say we looked at something like claims data for the country, the TMSIS data. You could ask questions like, which services have the highest utilization rates, or which geographic areas have the largest populations that are being underserved by particular services, or you know, think about any question that you would just want to ask of the data, being able to just do that, write it into a prompt, get that result back with a supporting visualization that has actually used AI and machine learning to query and pull that back to you. Like that's what I've been looking forward to for a really long time with this world of Medicaid data that has sat out there. And that's one of the things that has me really, really excited about the emerging technology space.
Yeah, and that's great.
well
Go back to that time to value issue. You know, we see huge advances in the way we use machine learning to rapidly ingest the data and make use of it so that you can do those sort of queries. So that time to value is really compressed to, again, years and years to a very short period of time.
Yeah, that's
I think
great.
the only thing that I wanted to chime in
No, go ahead.
real quick is just, you know, and I think goes back to something we talked about earlier. Make sure that you're answering tomorrow's questions, not yesterday's. And, you know, just the example that you gave there with the Quick Insight tool. I mean, that is, we don't even know all of the use cases that we could apply it to yet, but we know it's innovative functionality that fits well within things that we know Medicaid agencies need. So kind of creating the space for creativity within our technology stack and being able to rapidly bring in those innovations is, I think, what states need to aim towards, right? Like enable the opportunity for you to take advantage of all these advances that we're making.
Yeah, big plus one, Brandon. Big plus one to that. I think that's yeah, I think that's spot on.
Yeah. So how about fire? So let's talk about fire for as another example, and we'll stick with you, Brandon, on this. I think when we hear, you know, Medicaid enterprise, we think purely in terms of, you know, the state itself and the Medicaid agency, but it feels like modernization is, you know, also an opportunity to empower patients and providers with the data as well, and obviously that's you know, one of the reasons fire is there. So what's your thoughts on that, Brandon?
Yeah, I think it goes back to something Nick said. We need to keep patients and providers at the center of our thought processes, right? Like they're ultimately the folks that we need the Medicaid enterprise to be able to serve, because they're the ones who, you know, are driving improvements in care, and they're the outcomes that we really care about. And so in kind of thinking about your question, John, you know, it may not be, or my answer may not be specific to fire, but I think fire is ushering in the conversation about how can we empower those stakeholders that we just talked about, who are often sit outside the Medicaid agency. And I think it may actually start with value-based payment, you know, as opposed to fire. It's ushering in the conversation. Fire is the tool set, I think, that helps us to achieve it. And so what I mean by that is, in my experience, interoperability hasn't always been a priority for our payers or providers. In some ways, in fact, they've probably benefited from those fiefdoms and the market advantages they offer. And that's in addition to things like the security challenges of moving data from place to place. But the shift towards value-based contracts is really changing all that, because it's requiring providers to shift responsibility for patients. So no matter where they're seeking care, providers shoulder that responsibility. And I think that suddenly makes everyone in the ecosystem not just willing, but very anxious to share data. And I think Medicaid agencies are now just getting swept up by that healthy pressure, right? Traditionally, they've been sort of, I call them data black holes. Lots of data goes in, very little information often comes out. And so as Medicaid not only begins to promote value-based payment arrangements, but to really find novel ways to incorporate things like equity and social determinants of health into their value-based strategies, I think the need to share data is really only going to grow. And that's where FIRE comes in, to get back to the question, right? To create those new opportunities to grease the car's wheels, to kind of go back to the metaphor that we all started with, to share information in novel ways, to be able to drive those advancements in the way that we pay for incentivize care.
Actually, and
Great.
Brandon, I just want to emphasize something that you said really resonated with me. And then it's there's been this historical investment of into technology, into something like interoperability, or I worked on a lot of health information exchange funding and implementation out in that in part of the High Tech Act work. And a lesson that I learned, well, kind of the hard way from that, was that building out the technology, like creating an infrastructure, that doesn't actually create a need or a want to use it. And so just FIRE is great. There's a million reasons why FIRE is awesome. It by itself, I don't think necessitates much of anything, frankly. But if we go back to like you said, the patient, the provider, the member, the person that is at the center of this, work backwards from that, then the technology it really just falls into place about how this can be enabled, how we can implement something that delights a Medicaid member, or really solves something for a provider in their practice or in a hospital, and that then becomes that drive for change, not the building of the technology itself.
Yeah, I like the idea of technology as an enabler. Really, that is the key. And we are talking about the performance of the network. And we know that the networks, we hear about physician burnout all the time, right? So how do we enable it to make their life better, give them better information, actionable steps, and have them return to the joy of practice? How do we think about the Medicaid recipients, right? How do we get them engaged and feel that they're being serviced in a timely and effective way, and that their needs are being addressed? Not just traditional fee-for-service health services, but also we know that these issues of the social, environmental, economic environment they live in really drive their health outcomes. And we also know that their behaviors do too, so you have to have them engaged. And then lastly, for those high-risk patients, how do you engage the care managers and have everybody working on the same page, the same data, the same information, the same insights, working together to achieve the goals? And the ultimate goal is to improve the health of the recipients.
Yeah, fantastic. I think you probably answered my next question, which was, hey, this is very much a technology forward conversation. And a lot of people would be asking, hey, why aren't we talking about, the constituents or the health or health outcomes, and why we're spending so much time and money and attention on technology and modernizing technology? So I think you might have answered that question, but anything more to add from the panel there?
No, but would love to hear from the audience. Why don't we check in with another poll?
Yeah, we've got that coming up actually right now. So why don't we go ahead and ask the next question from a polling question, which will be, what do you consider the most important success criterion for MES systems modernization or modularity? Bring that up.
As we're waiting on the answers, one additional thought on your question, John, because I think it's the absolute question, or the right question to ask. It's, as I think all of the panelists have said, this is not a technology conversation, it's an outcomes conversation. And so we absolutely have to start with the problems that we're looking to solve. But I will say, that doesn't mean that we've been investing in the wrong things throughout. All the progress that we've made under modularity has been really meaningful. And I think maybe it's just that we've been historically measuring those investments the wrong way. And so shifting away from things like functionality-centric checklists towards things like outcome-based certification, I think is a really great start, because I think it opens up the kinds of questions states can ask in their procurement. And I think that's another sort of vein that we could travel down is, the way that states have procured isn't always helpful at answering the problems that they're trying to solve. Because I think in some ways they've been more worried about, again, meeting those checklists, or, working with their IVNV or their CMS counterpart, And that has been more on a functionality level than an outcomes level. And so I think sort of that shift towards, are we driving outcomes in procurement, will also kind of help us think about and help states plan for, the right technology conversations.
And actually,
Appreciate
Brendan, there's a question that came in that says, the panel talked about procurement, but what about implementation? How do you make sure these modules are successfully implemented and used? And I think like what you said really gets at that. It's less about like, did the module itself get implemented and go live, and like, right? It's what is the business outcome? What is the Medicaid outcome? What is the impact to the Medicaid program that actually went live as a result of this technology? And I think having a direct, measurable way to look at that impact to the program really then becomes your success criteria. Like, did your thing go live? That actually like doesn't impact beneficiaries or members or the providers. Did it improve? Like, did the module go live and improve how beneficiaries get care? Maybe it reduces hospital readmission rates, the thing that you went live with. Maybe the thing you went live with improved how members can apply for benefits online. Maybe it improved how providers can provide care, like increased some care level for using a data platform that is sourced from many different places. Like if you change the success criteria from thing went to implemented to business outcome, now you're measuring a value that aligns back to that, honestly, like the goal, the North Star of Medicaid.
Absolutely.
All right, so I think we have our results. All right, so for question number 2, what do we consider the most important success criteria for modernization or modularity? Time to value at 18%, increase employee productivity and satisfaction. Nobody looked for IT harmonization and reduced speed, so I'm probably not a lot of IT people on the call, I guess. But and then improve citizen outcomes.
John, hold on. I think let's take a moment and just acknowledge that nobody said that the most important success criteria was IT harmonization and reduced spend. Like, awesome.
Improve citizens' outcome is what we've been saying. Start with the end result, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And improving citizen outcomes was the highest ranking. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I do think that that increased employee productivity and satisfaction coming in second there is important, because we've talked about outcomes to the Medicaid beneficiaries and providers, and obviously that is the end goal. But getting back to the attendee who asked the question, I think one thing that we can also do differently in implementation is really focus on change management, because it's not that something got successfully procured, but in order to have the outcome that we want, people have to actually use the system. And so I think creating experiences within the technology, Nick, to use your word, that delight users is really critical here. And I think it's making sure that we're creating or leveraging software that is intuitive, not just to technical users, but to business users and executives, so that they can really make data part of their day-to-day. Because you can't drive or have data-driven decision-making if data is not accessible at all levels of the agency.
I mean, honestly, one of the things that we do a lot of time is work backwards directly with Medicaid agencies. We love to have these sorts of conversations, and but what we've seen is that there are more than one person. Let's write grammar here, but not every conversation needs to be about the member or the constituent or citizen. Like, they are the central focus, that no doubt, and providing health coverage to the needy, to those that need it, is the core goal of Medicaid. But there are other users, there are other customers in the Medicaid space, providers, state workers, county workers. Like, there are folks that use and interact with these systems, and delighting and improving their world, their work, their experience with the Medicaid system, like that can have, significant positive effect as well. And I think it's important to recognize, like, okay, if you're building a module that is more on the front end, public facing, then who is your customer? Who is the person that you're building that for? That might be the constituent or the member. But if you're building something that's more on the administrative side, like, take a look and see, like, who is the person that you're actually building that for. It could be hospitals, it could be providers, and that spending time on who that person is time well spent. I will just double down on that.
Fantastic. So we have another audience question here. I'll throw it out to the panel, whoever wants to answer it. Question was, what type of information do you make it available at a high level and at point of care to drive improvements in care processes? Can you give some success stories?
Well, I think the kind of thing that you want to see, doctors have a hard time keeping all their information here in their head. And then, they don't want them pecking around, right? So we've implemented electronic medical record systems and other systems for them to use. But when you're seeing somebody, you're dealing with somebody on a telehealth or on the phone, you don't want to be able to have to hunt and peck around, right? Or I think, as many of us have experienced, I know my father used to say, my doctor doesn't talk to me anymore. He's too busy working on the computer. So I think what we want to do is delight the user and be able to present actionable information like, here's a issue about the patient you may not know, and an action to take, right? Here's an order to test, a gap to close. Same thing for, I think, to Nick's point, is you want to have that ease of use even for the folks that are administrating and using the system as well. So we've done a lot of work where doctors say, this is like an X-ray, this technology I'm using. It tells me things I didn't know before, or that aren't even in my electronic health record. And, the things that are important to the member that they're dealing with are, how much is this going to cost me in terms of transportation I have to take, or in terms of what I have to do in order to address this medical problem I have. So these are all things that we can start to provide insights and make it much easier at the point of care for the physician, and ultimately, going back to the smartphone analogy, for the Medicaid recipient as well.
Fantastic. We have another question. The panel talked about procurement, but what about implementation? How do we make sure these modules are successfully implemented and used? I'll throw that out for the panel.
Yeah, I would say, I think that you can, so one way to look at that is definitely back to the outcomes and the business side, like the program benefit that is going to be derived. But within an outcome, like if you're seeking to improve something, make it faster, make it cheaper, make it more efficient, those are all the things that you're trying to do. You're going to want a way to measure that. And I know CMS has a certification repository. It's a GitHub certification repo. They'll be continuing to provide updates to it, I believe, for folks to look at and see, like, as systems go live. I know in particular there are a lot of health information exchange outcomes out there that actually are state supplied, that actually show here's what the health information exchange in state X or state of Nirvana or whatever, and then here's the measurable impact that is having. So like, that's definitely a place to go and check out that CMS certification repository. I believe that'll be continually updated, and a good way to look for those successful implementations and the measurement criteria by which they're actually assessed. Are they successful? That's definitely a good place that I would point to.
Fantastic. So I think we have a little over 5 minutes left. Let me just share the screen here again. We'll do a little bit of a wrap up. But if I can ask each one of you, what would be your number one takeaway if you would like the audience to have the number one takeaway from these conversations? Some of them are the topics that we talked about in the screen, but yeah, I'll go through each one of you and let's hear what you have to say. We'll start with you, Nick.
Yeah, great. So thanks for having me. This has been super fun. I'll say number one takeaway is for if a state is taking on a transformation, they want to improve, they want to transform, they want to do something in this space, is spend time on actually identifying who the customer is, or if you're on the state side and customer sounds a very commercial word, who the member is or who the person is in this space. Identify, spend time on that, who that customer actually is, what they need, what they want, what they're currently experiencing. You can work backwards from there, and everything else will then fall into place. And that'll hit the other things like that we talked about earlier, where you can start small and deliver, and everything else really just happens. You start to see these great technologies come in and play. So the ending takeaway from my perspective there is start with the customer, start with that person, work backwards, and everything else falls into place.
Dr. Nace.
Yeah, the world is changing. We have not only a change in technology, but we have a change in kind of the way we pay for services, right? So there's this movement from paying for discrete services, what we often call fee for service, to really this move of paying for the value that's created, or fee for value, right? Or payment for value, value-based care. We often take all the way to saying population health initiatives like whole person care. You need to create that data fabric that's very flexible and gives very timely results to understand how to get ahead of these initiatives, as opposed to our history of just asking the network to report on the percentage of people that are in value-based care contracts. Let's get ahead, let's learn and be able to iterate and learn to be successful in implementing these new innovations that entail pay for value and whole person care. And that way we can feel comfortable and we can track in a very transparent and open way visibility about how we're performing and understanding our success.
Thank you, Dr. Nace. Brandon?
And I want to reiterate both Nick and Dr. Nace's comments. I think my comments sort of sit subsumed to that, because I think those are the ultimate goals. But if I want people to have an additional takeaway, it's that let's build. It's that third bullet, I think. Build data structures that enable rapid, low-risk innovation. I think we've gotten caught in this fallacy of thinking that that these modules have to take a long time, like that this is going to be a multi-year process. And at the end of it, I'm going to have a really awesome solution, and then I'm going to create some bridges along the way to help me make it through these next 2 years. But COVID has shown us that, again, we can build things very quickly to answer small, discrete challenges. We need to think about what those challenges are, to Nick's point, and then build solutions on top of flexible data structures that allow us to do that. And so really, work with vendors, not just the ones you have, but who are really innovating in the space to help you to be able to deliver on your outcomes very quickly. And so I guess my encouragement would be to think small and move fast.
Great. Thank you, Nick, Dr. Nace, Brandon, for your time, your insights on this important topic. I want to thank the audience and participation as well. There was additional question about how to get more information or how to find out more information about technology. Certainly reach out to us directly. You have our emails there. You have the links to our websites for both the AWS site as well as the Innovation sites in your invites. And then also we're all at these conferences, right? We'll be at the MESC, we'll be at NAMD, and please come up, talk to us there, and reach out. Thank you, everybody, for your time.